Hello students, welcome back into the another session on software testing. So students, in the last lecture we discussed about the static techniques. We discussed why static testing is important. In the static technique, we generally don't execute the software, but instead we check the documentations, we check the design of the software, we check whether the different guidelines are being followed or not. So all these things are checked in the static testing. So the part of the static testing is the review process. So in the reviews, we have to go with the following activities. So basically there are two different types of reviews which are being conducted in the software testing scenarios. One is a formal review and another one is a informal reviews. So formal and informal, the difference is like in the formal reviews, the very strict process is getting followed while you are reviewing the software. Whereas in the case of informal reviews, internal people are involved and not that much formal activities are followed in the informal reviews. So the difference between the formal and informal reviews is the kind of a strictness which are being followed while you are taking the reviews. So the very first activity before you will get started with the formal review is the planning. So this activity needs to be planned in advance. You cannot kickstart the formal review immediately whenever you want. But here you have to inform your reviewers in advance that on this particular date we will start the review. You have to prepare some documents. You have to understand the software before you will start the reviews. So that's why this planning is very important. So software tester as well as software developer should know when the reviews are being conducted, and accordingly they should plan, and this plan should be done in advance. Then here another point that we have to consider while we will work on the formal reviews is the entry and exit criteria for the review. Now obviously there should be a very strict line, there should be a definite line where you have to start working on the reviews and when you have to stop working on the reviews. So when you start taking the reviews and when you stop taking the reviews, that should be known, and that is nothing but the enter and exit criteria. Now there can be number of examples. For example, you may consider like reviews will be started once the 60% of the designing part will be done, or once the requirements are understood. Probably you will have different exit criterias. Exit criterias will be like, for example, you may consider once the design is foolproof, design is tested and all the parts are tested properly about up to 90%, then we can stop working on the reviews. So these are nothing but the enter and exit criteria that you will need to follow. If you don't follow enter and exit criteria, probably you will skip the schedule. And in order to maintain your schedule, you will need to work on enter and exit criteria. So you should know very in clear manner in advance when you are going to start and when you are going to stop. Then once you hit the entry criteria, then you should start working on the reviews, then you should start taking the reviews of the software. Here in the review process, you have to note potential defects that are probably there in your software. See, the sole purpose of taking the review is nothing but to find out the defects. And here the reviewers are supposed to pose some questions to the software developer about different choices that they have made during the software development. For example, if developer has chosen different logic or different algorithm or different techniques, then developer should be able to clarify why he has chosen that particular approach. And if there are any defects in that approach, or if the approach is not properly implemented, then reviewers will find out that as a potential defect. Then we have the formal review meeting. In the formal review meeting, the communication will be done between the developer and the software tester or the reviewer. Here both of them or the group of these teams will come together and they will interact with each other. Remember, in the formal review process, the reviewers are already have the knowledge of your software. They are not just coming over there and they are starting the review process, but instead it's a formal. That's why the developers and the testers are well acquainted with the what software is supposed to be developed for. So they know the requirements, they know well in advance what designing or what sorts of implementations are done. So that's why this is a kind of a homework which reviewers are taking before they will attend the review meeting. So in the review meeting, they communicate with the developer that okay, we have found this many problems, we have found this many defects in your designing or your documentation part, and these things needs to be done, this needs to be clarified. Then the next part is examining, evaluation and recording. Now this is nothing but what happens in the review meetings. You have to examine the code if the code is available, otherwise you have to find out what designing approach has been chosen, how the designing is done, you have to evaluate it, and also you have to record it. Recording here in the sense you have to log every activity that you are doing with your software. So that is called as a recording. So you have to keep on recording all the review process, that what different sorts of discussions are being carried out, what is agreed upon the standards, all these things needs to be recorded every time. And once this communication is done, and if there are some defects which are found out and which are conveyed to the developer, and if it is agreed that developer will work on that defects and will certify it whether it is rectified or not, then there is a rework process. So in the rework process, developer will rectify all the problems which were found out in the review process. So that is nothing but a rework. So here developer has to work on it, and then again once it is done, then the follow-up will be taken up by the reviewers. Reviewers will again attend the meeting and will take the follow-up that these many defects were found out in the last meeting, and after the rework whether the defects are still there or whether they have been fixed, that will be considered, that will be discussed in the another review meeting, that is the follow-up review meeting. And once that is done, then they will find out what was the exit criteria and whether we have met with the exit criteria or not. If we have hit the exit criteria, then we can stop the review process and we can move on to the next process. So that is nothing but the exit criteria. So every time you have to keep on looking on the entry and exit criteria. Once you have hit the exit criteria, there is no point in reviewing your software again and again, because once you have considered, suppose 70 to 80% of the design defects should be rectified or fixed, then once you have hit that milestone of 60 to 70%, then there is no point to move forward and do extra working on the review process. Because if you go on doing that, then as you know, entire things cannot be tested, and as it will take more time and resources, you will skip the schedule and that will hit the deadline. So this is how the review process will be carried out. Let's talk about the review process in detail. Now in any review process, there are certain roles and responsibilities which needs to be performed by the participants. So here we have certain roles which are being performed. So the first one is project manager. So project manager is a person who is responsible for the entire project. So he initiates the review, he decides who will be the participant for the review. So he will decide which are the different domain experts which you will need for the review process, who will be the moderator. He will decide entire group of people who will be attending the review process. Then there are moderators. Moderator leads the meeting. So for any meeting there needs to be a leader who will moderate or who will lead the meeting. So moderator is responsible for the entire review process. So project manager is as responsible for the entire project. Moderator is restricted for the review process only. So the role of moderator is to only work upon the reviews. So moderator will discuss, mediates and summarizes different planning activities. He will discuss about how the different reviews will be conducted, who will be authorized to what particular task. So the moderator is entirely responsible for the starting to the end of the review process. Then we have author. Author is a person who will be responsible for presenting the answers when reviewers will ask the questions. So if reviewers have certain questions, then author will be there. Author is nothing but the person who has written the software over here. So the author or a developer will be responsible to present the software or to present the module that he or she has prepared. Then obviously we need reviewers, as it is a review process, so we will need reviewers. So we have the reviewers or inspectors or checkers who will review the entire process. So reviewers are nothing but a group of people or a group of experts from the different domains. So there are certain people who will be experts in the design domain. There are certain people who will be expert in the engineering domain. There are certain people who are technically expert. So all these people are participant in the review process, and they will work as a reviewers for the entire software process. So those are nothing but a reviewers. And then we have a scribe. So the scribe is nothing but a sort of a recorder who will be noting down entire process. So what are the different points which are raised in the review process? What are the different discussions being done in the review process? What is the conclusion? What needs to be fixed? What are the defects which have been found out? So all these things needs to be recorded properly. Otherwise, when we will have the next meeting, how we will come to know that what was the problem which was found out in the last one? So for that particular purpose, we need a scribe or a recorder. So here the recorder's role is to maintain the entire record of the review process. So he is responsible for the entire documentation associated with the review process. So this is how the entire review process is carried out. Let's talk about the types of reviews. So we have inspections and walkthroughs. So the inspections are done very strictly. So these are kind of a formal reviews. So we have the inspections which are considered as a formal reviews. So how it is different from the informal reviews or the walkthroughs? So here in the case of inspection, these are well organized and formal sessions, and here we have a clear agenda for every meeting. Then it needs an intensive preparation and follow-up activities. Of course, because the review process over here is very stringent and it is like a formal one. So because of that, intensive preparation is required. Now the meaning of intensive preparation here is, before you will start a review, some handouts needs to be given to the reviewers who will work before they will attend the reviews. So they will look at the different domains upon which you are working on. They will see the different aspects of it. They will study it and they will prepare for this review. And once they are prepared, then only the review process will start. So that's why it is intensive prepared process. Then we need a moderator and scribe over here, because this is like a more formal one. So we need moderator who will be assisting and who will be directing the entire review process. Also we need a scribe over here who will maintain the entire records of the review process, that which are the different activities which are being discussed over there. So they will maintain the entire record over here. And the main purpose here for any review process is to find out the defects, but here using more structured manner. Second type of review is called as an informal review. So we already discussed what is formal review. Formal reviews are also called as a inspections, whereas informal reviews we can call them as a walkthroughs. So walkthroughs, the reason why we are calling it as a walkthrough, because it is an open-ended sessions. Open-ended in the sense, over here there is no predefined agenda which is set like it was there in the inspection. In the case of inspection, you had clear agenda, you mentioned some points and these points were predefined even before the starting of the review. But in the case of walkthrough, you just walk through the entire process and probably you will not have decided that what you are going to discuss, what different agendas you will have. So it is like you are just exploring your software in a different manner, and that's why walkthroughs are essential. So these are some open-ended sessions. Open-ended, reason we are calling it as open-ended, because sometimes you will never come to the conclusion that what needs to be done. You will never come to that point, and that's why it is an open-ended session. Here you may take the different scenarios. You will have the dry runs and peer group participation. Peer group participation in the sense, you may not have the experts over here, but like you have a different programmer who is also working on the project. So you will ask that peer person to also inspect or also take a walkthrough of your code. So probably he could find out the problems in your code. Then here meeting is led by the author. Here is a major difference between the inspection and the walkthrough. In the case of inspection, we needed moderator, and moderator was someone who was not the author, means who wasn't the developer. But here in the case of this walkthrough, you will have the developer who is leading the entire meeting. So developer or the author who has written the software will work as a head of the meeting and who will lead the meeting. So the walkthroughs are generally done to understand your software in a proper manner but in a different perspective. The perspective of author might not be the only aspect. There can be a different aspects, there can be different angles to look at your software, and that's why author is always recommended to go through the walkthroughs. So in the case of walkthrough, you will have your colleagues, you will have your party, another programmer, and that person who is not senior to you or who is not superior to you will be inspecting or will be looking at your software and will be checking the entire things and maybe probably find out the problems in your software. So during presentation by the author, the reviewers try to locate deviations or the problems in your software. So it's like you are asking someone who is your friend to inspect or just go through the code and find out whether he could find out any problems in that. So that is nothing but the entire agenda or entire purpose of going through the walkthroughs. Then here are some examples of walkthroughs. You have the walkthroughs of documents. So the documentation is also important, as we have seen the importance of documentation in the later on phases when you have a bugs or when another person will join you the team. So how that person will work on your software. So the documentation is very important. So for that you can conduct walkthroughs. You can have walkthroughs of user interfaces. So whatever the user interfaces that you have designed, probably they are not that perfect or not that intuitive. So you may want someone else to join you and to look at those interfaces and figure out if there are any issues. So like in the walkthroughs, you have the walkthroughs of interfaces also, and then you have a walkthroughs of business process and modeling data. So like how the data is taken into your software, how you are modeling the data inside in your software. So of that also you can take the walkthrough. So the bottom line over here is to understand is that you have two different types of reviews. The first one is a formal review and another one is called as an informal review. When we talk about a formal review, it is like a more like an inspection. So here you will have the professionals joining your review. These are all the superior people compared to the author. So here you will have the project manager. As I told you, project manager will decide the entire schedule, entry and exit criteria. Then you will have a moderator. Moderator will moderate the entire meeting. He will decide what different topics needs to be discussed. And then you will have an author who will be presenting his software to all the reviewers. And then you have the scribe or the recorder who will maintain all the record. So these are the in a more professional manner. Whereas in the other case we have walkthroughs. Walkthroughs are called as informal reviews. So informal over here is nothing but you don't have the professionals over here like you had in the inspections, but here in this particular case you will have the people who are your colleague, who are your peer programmers. They will join you and they will try to figure out the problems in your software. So that is called as a informal reviews. Okay, so this is how this entire review process are carried out. Generally you go with the informal reviews first. So you will have the walkthroughs initially, and once your software has went through the walkthroughs, then only you go for the inspection process. Let's discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages or the drawbacks of walkthroughs. So the one of the major advantage of the walkthrough is that you need a little effort to get started with the walkthroughs, because these are very informal and open-ended sessions. So you don't need to work a lot, or you don't need to prepare a lot before you start with the walkthroughs. So that's why in a very short notice you can start with the walkthrough. In the case of inspection, you have to give a prior planning. You need to have a proper planning. So accordingly you will need to provide some handouts to your reviewers. They will do their work before they will attend the review. But in the case of walkthroughs, that is not required. In the case of walkthrough, anybody can join immediately to your walkthrough process. And these are the open-ended sessions. Open-ended in the sense it is not supposed to be concluded with the particular point like we did with the inspections. But here it is like an open-ended discussion. So here different thought process will come up, different ideas, different actions will be discussed, and probably each one of them or none of them or some of them will be adopted. So that's why these are the very open-ended one. Here the another disadvantage, so far we have seen the advantages, but there is a disadvantage also. The one of the biggest disadvantage over here is that the person who has written the software will be the responsible for the entire process of this review. So as you can clearly understand over here, as the person has written the software, he is also responsible for the entire process of the review. So here he has a great influence. So he or she is actually moderating the review, and there is a chances of domination by the author. So the person who is writing down the software will present only the positive side of the software, and he will never focus on the negative sides or the shortcomings of the software. Earlier in the case of inspections, we had moderator, and moderator was the different person than the author. So moderator will look at the both angles, like a positive side and the negative side of the software. But in the case of walkthrough, the person or the author who has written the software is also responsible for the entire review process. So maybe he or she will neglect the shortcomings of the software, and that's why there is a little outcome that you may expect out of it, until unless your author or a developer is too honest to figure out their shortcomings, then it is all right. But otherwise, in the case of normal cases, in the normal scenarios, the person will try to hide shortcomings of the problem, shortcomings of the entire process or the software, and that's why it will have a little control over the software quality. But despite of all that, we needed walkthroughs before we proceed for the inspections, because we cannot proceed directly for the inspections, because if we directly proceed for the inspections, we will be investing a lot of resources, and there are many things which can be found out in the earlier phases of the walkthroughs. And generally formal reviews are not that many frequently conducted, but the walkthroughs you can conduct on alternate days or on everyday basis, and it is possible because you are not engaging that many people over here. So that's why these are some of the advantages and the disadvantages of the walkthroughs. You have to understand both sides of the walkthroughs, and accordingly you have to proceed with the walkthroughs. But understand, walkthroughs and inspections are very complementary to each other. They are not substitute. Means I cannot say I will have the walkthrough and I will skip the inspections, because inspection is more stringent and I have to go through the inspections every time. But again, walkthroughs are important in order to reduce the problems which may arise into the inspections. So in order to minimize the problems which may come into the inspections, you have to first go with the walkthroughs. So that's why these are very complementary to each other, but can't be the substitute for each other. Having said that, we have come to an end of this session. We'll meet you again in another session. Till then, take care. Thank you.